In March of 2020, the Prison Policy Initiative published a report citing more than 2 million people are incarcerated in the United States. Now, these numbers include the state and federally held individuals. Here in Texas, we have approximately 250,000 men and women incarcerated or under some type of state supervision. Now, when you hear of these numbers, what are the first two things that come to your mind? Number one, that's a lot of people incarcerated. And number two, it's really not my responsibility. Now, I too had this same thought process growing up. I believe if a person was arrested, they broke the law. And if they were convicted, sentenced, and went to prison, they were guilty. And the thought of me assisting anyone returning home from prison never crossed my mind. You see, over the years, I've come to understand things differently. The fact is, we're all subject to our own beliefs, and some are not all true. The reality is, our beliefs are sometimes rooted in the little white lies that we choose to tell ourselves. Little white lies are those things that we choose to tell ourselves when the truth is unbearable or unknown. For example, every person incarcerated is guilty. Now, that's a little white lie. Did you know, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, more than 2,600 men and women have been wrongfully incarcerated and exonerated for crimes that they did not commit? The registry cites police and prosecutorial misconduct, tainted identification, and faulty scientific evidence as some of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. It's hard to fathom how one tainted identification can land you in prison for 20 years. According to some experts' estimations, approximately 10% of America's prison population is innocent. That's about 200,000 people. Coincidentally, it's half the population of Miami. Now, while this may be hard to digest, the dehumanized conditions in which people are forced to live once incarcerated can drastically alter a person's life. Prison life erases a person's identity and it confiscates their freedom. Imagine a system where choices as simple as taking a shower or how many pair of underwear you have is mandated. A system that takes your birth name and gives you a number that reduces you from a citizen to a commodity. A state of mind that provides no room for dreams, aspirations, or imaginations. Every day is this repetitive cycle of stress, uncertainty, violence, and self-imposed trauma. And with minimal medical and psychiatric assistance, mental instability and death becomes the norm. So much like Bill Murray in the 1993 Groundhog Day movie, just nowhere close to being a comedy. This is the life in which people are exposed to once incarcerated. At the age of 19, this became my life. I remember it like it was yesterday. My good friend drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas, and we made it to his girlfriend's house first, so I decided to walk the rest of the way home. This became the longest walk of my life. A 5-minute walk turned into a 17-year journey. Making it to the payphone first, I decided to call my friend and ask him to unlock the door. And as I crossed the street, I was bombarded by police cars and multiple demands. The sounds of the handcuffs seemed to overshadow the reading of my Miranda rights, and the trip downtown was quiet and grim. Once downtown, I would be introduced to a detective, and here for the first time, I was the suspect in a murder and attempted murder. 17 months later, one court-appointed attorney and a 7-day jury trial yielded to a verdict of guilty. Shortly after my 20th birthday, I found myself signing my life away to the state of Texas for 60 years. I can still see the tears and somber looks of my mom and my dad as I was escorted off in chains and shackles. And the cries of my siblings, "You can't take my brother," rings often in my ears. My thoughts reassured me that everything would be all right, but my heart recognized a little white lie. I felt life would drastically change, and change it did. In the blink of an eye, freedom became just a word, no longer my reality. My place of confinement was Cofield, one of the largest units in Texas, housing over 5,000 men. My identity was reduced to 728716, a number that defined my status and oftentimes my state of mind. A mindset that was so close to slavery, the 13th Amendment became more than the passage in a document. It became a way of life. My dreams of going to TSTC for engineering in Waco, gone. I no longer had opportunities for college or future employment because now my everyday task is tedious field work with my hands blistered by the garden hoe from harvesting sweet potatoes. Maintaining my sanity was my biggest battle, and the freely distributed psychotropic drugs in the infirmary wasn't an option. Interestingly, I found solace and strength in the other men dressed just like me. Men incarcerated doing time, but somehow found freedom and peace in a place filled with chaos. 15 years of my life went by standing in the balance of stagnation and depression. I hit my lowest in 2009 after receiving the news that my father had passed of cancer. And it was then that I was encouraged by a nurse that I worked for to remember, God made the mornings good. And regardless of what the day may bring, make a good morning out of every bad day. 6 months later, I walked out of prison. Hope is a rare commodity for the individual returning home from prison. Data shows the average person returning home will have spent a minimum of 5 to 10 years disconnected from family, technology, society, and more. Bouts of PTSD, stress, and self-imposed trauma are often the mental prisons of the post-incarcerated. My transition was no different. I was happy to be out, but I feared failure because I was totally lost. The world had changed. I oftentimes say I recognized everything, but I knew nothing. When I first went to prison, I purchased a beeper. 15 years later, there's iPhones. My city landmarks was Pegasus on top of the building and HL Greens. Gone. I personally suffered moments of fatigue and frustration just trying to keep up in a world that had seemed to have left me behind. Thankfully, my mom was still alive, and so a place to stay wasn't a problem. And it was with the assistance of family and friends that I was able to navigate my transition from prison back to society. But this luxury isn't afforded to every person returning home from prison. The transition from prison to society is a struggle, and without resources and assistance can become an unbearable burden. Here lies the need to rethink reentry. You see, our criminal justice system has done a great job with incarceration, but has lacked in areas of rehabilitation. Here in Texas, regardless of how much time a person has done, the state allots a paper check valued at $100 after years of free labor. Now keep in mind, sometimes people are released with no ID, no birth certificate, or extra clothes. But we expect them to return to normalcy and succeed. Housing and unemployment have become such burdens that many are forced into homelessness. As a whole, we've not done all that we can do, removing the barriers of success from individuals, families, and communities rebuilding their lives after incarceration. But all is not lost. There's work to do. Let's begin to support investments in rehabilitative programs pre and post-release. Let's look into initiatives that bring about livable wage income and employment for people returning home from prison. Let's also consider legislations that bring about change in state and federal prison systems. Lastly, social media is at the fingertips of everyone to research and advocate for great causes. Now, I hope I've said something this evening that challenges the little white lies that may shape your actions today. I must admit, for me, it's been quite a journey with many more miles of freedom. And just to think, I was innocent of the crime the whole time.